complicated, you know, man. Like a damn Rubik's Cube, man. You like talking about blue, red, man, then you get to one side and like messing up.
All right, Morgoth, welcome to the show. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing good. I've got a touch of the flu, so I may sound a little bit different, but well, I shouldn't say a flu. That's a little bit. It's a cold. It's just a cold. You know, people get carried away with these things, but it's just a cold. I'm a bit snotty. I've got a bit of a rough throat, but except for that, I'm doing very well.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear it. Every once in a while, I run a poll, you know, on one of my social medias, and I just ask the question like, oh, who should I talk to, right? Because having an interview show, you know, eventually you start to run out of guests, and without fail, the kind of number one request I get is for you to come on, and so I'm very pleased to be speaking with you. You're a significant influence of mine, and so yeah, a lot of my ideas and the way I think of things are kind of informed by you and your work. But if people don't know anything about you, could you describe kind of, you know, who you are and what you do on the internet?
Well, I run Morgoth's Review. I've got a YouTube channel and I've got a Substack. Now, I began blogging in 2014. That's where the Morgoth's Review sort of title came from. And then I moved over into YouTube, mainly doing just video essays because I started writing essays. That I kind of transitioned over onto YouTube and just did the same there again. But along the way, some of the videos got quite fancy with rolling footage and intros and things. But then I've more and more moved back to Substack over the last sort of 18 months or so. I still dabble in a bit of YouTube. I should do more, try and like turn more of the essays into video essays. But it's a lot of work, and I prefer to move on to the next thing. And I pop up here and there on live streams. I've actually got a monthly, but the only regular live stream that I do is me and Endeavour do classic movies once a month. 1 month on my channel and 1 month on his. And then I'll pop up for guest appearances and whatnot like that as well. So that's pretty much me in terms of me internet presence.
Well, speaking of your live streams with Endeavour, the review that you guys do on specifically on Dirty Harry is one of my favorites. It's kind of one that I perennially go back to. Just kind of an interesting specific if people want to know a place to start.
Yeah, it's funny because my I don't know if it's the YouTube algorithm or what it is, but I get brutally punished off YouTube for live streaming, and I think it's because they want you to be consistent in what you do. So if I do my sort of bread and butter on YouTube, you know, my standard content would be say 15 to 20 minute video essay. And I think when you step outside of that, YouTube just doesn't like it. And so the classic movies tend to get crucified. And it's become this thing where they're kind of they're kind of from the heart. And I go into it knowing that it'll be a core audience of people, and like it's never going to hit the algorithm. I'm not going to get 30,000 views and whatnot. But the Dirty Harry one, that got a lot of views. I don't know why that happened, but maybe there just wasn't much on YouTube discussing it. But that was a good one, yeah.
Well, I do think that, and look, I didn't live through it, but there is this kind of feeling that we're returning to a sort of 70s malaise, you know, where it does kind of feel like they're ethnically diverse gangsters, you know, sitting on every street corner with switchblades. You know, maybe the tropes are slightly different, but I think that there is something to that, you know, the San Francisco kind of post the summer of love, right? Where, you know, the hippies have moved out and the drug dealers moved in. It is, and obviously it's not perfect, is sort of analogous to post 2020 America, you know, where the mostly peaceful summer of 2020 is over, but, you know, everyone's still kind of picking up the pieces. And I do think that there's sort of just kind of like a service level similarity there.
Yeah, there is. I think it's going on everywhere. I mean, I've seen some of the images coming out of San Francisco in particular, and it is amazing. It does look horrible. I mean, I actually think San Francisco of today looks worse than what it does in Dirty Harry, to be honest. I think And Dirty Harry, you've got a sort of particular breed of criminals, but there's like I'm thinking of like the black fella, you know, at the start of it, where they're robbing the store and he takes that one alive and whatnot. And you could at least have a conversation with him and a couple of one-liners. But the images that I see of like the zombie people bent over and sort of shuffling around, like that isn't even in. I mean, I don't know what Dirty Harry would even make of that. I think he would throw the badge in the pond straight away if that's what he had to deal with, because it's as if he's not even dealing with like the crazy psycho in Dirty Harry is terrifying because he comes across as if he isn't rational at all. And it seems like that's more and more become the norm, where you have a sort of a weird libtard like that. Like he is like just thoroughly unpleasant. He actually the psycho in the original Dirty Harry is kind of like what we're dealing with now, but in managerial positions across the West. That kind of highly strung, kind of giggling lunatic. And you know, we're all hoping that like Donald Trump or Caesar will be our Dirty Harry to put the mad dog down once and for all. So in that way, like I can see why people kind of lean into Dirty Harry and all of this. And of course, when you get into the 80s, you had that sort of big time of optimism, which I've spoken about a lot recently. I don't want to kind of do the same kind of takes all of the time, every time I pop up in a conversation with somebody. But you can clearly see that there was a transition, and I spoke about this on the Rambo ones we did at quite some length, actually.
Well, it brings up kind of an interesting question, because, you know, I'm a younger guy and I enjoy talking to older men who have more experience than I, who are interested in kind of similar things. And it's kind of a question I enjoy posing to people, right? Like, oh, you lived through the 70s, you lived through that period of malaise. And I kind of pose them the question, like, does it feel the same now? Like, is this the same thing? And I do think that there's a difference between hard times and this sort of feeling of, I don't even want to call it, but it's this feeling of like drowning in a swimming pool. You know, that despite being this powerful beast of a civilization, of an empire, we kind of can't motivate ourselves to do, you know, even simple things. And look, I'm not the biggest fan of Bukele. I'm not an El Salvadorian. I don't really have any dog in that fight. But seeing someone who essentially just decided, like, no, this is fixable. You know, like, oh, I can just do it. On one hand, you know, that's kind of white pilling. It's like, okay, look, this is not completely unsalvageable. But on the other hand, it's like, well, what the hell? Like, this means we can't fix it, and we're choosing not to. And I think that's something that's a little bit galling about this, is that this isn't just kind of that normal rise and fall of like, okay, sometimes the economy is a bit shit. You know, sometimes it's, you know, you kind of return to the mean, you know, as a culture or whatever, that happens. And then that feeling of just like, why are we doing this? You know, there is a way to stop, which is, I think, a little different.
I don't think in decades past there was a feeling of something capturing the choke points of the West. I think in you could have an economic collapse. You could have bad times would hit. But you didn't have the feeling that the civilization had just become something alien to you in sort of all of the institutions and everything like that. I've been forced to watch the Netflix thing because of the missus, The Crown, which I've kind of railed against. And I think I'm about 27 episodes in, but I can't get out of it anyway. This is our quiet time. And the one I was watching last night was it's like 1967, and it's the Harold Wilson Labour government, and they've just devalued the pound. So it was hard times there, apparently. But I mean, when you look back from, like, it isn't a thing that 1967 was a particularly hard time. All the 60s in general. Like, if my father would have been in his sort of teens then, And he just thinks that's absolutely wonderful. This is like a year or two before, the Italian Job, where they were all in the minis. This is when the Beatles would have been out, and it's widely seen as being this optimistic time now, this a positive time. Yet at the time, as I looked it up, it's pretty much true. But in The Crown, they depicted Lord Mountbatten and a bunch of kind of toffs and businessmen and the City of London, Bank of England, and all this. They were involved in a kind of conspiracy that they were actually going to stage a coup against the Labour government because they were socialists and they needed to get taken out. And I just thought, but it's crazy because back then it was nowhere near what it was now. Like where now is like this generation's Mountbatten, who's like, oh well, we need to take the Fleet Street, we need to take the armed forces, we need to have the police on side, and then the most important of all would be to have the Queen. If the Queen's on our side and I can get there and I can convince her that this is a good idea, it's for the best of the nation, we can pull this off. Like literally a purge, literally a coup in 1967 in England, because they devalued the pound. And I thought but that's so minor compared to what we have to deal with now. Like that's nothing. What a complete demographic transformation of the country. People just living kind of hand to mouth. This horrible mixture that we have, where you've got extreme hardship, but it's mixed with like super modern technology, Whereas in the past there was something more earthy about it. Whereas today, because you're surrounded by this technology, it's kind of like you're not poor, yet you are. You're not poor because you've got an iPhone, even though, like, and I did an article just before Christmas on this, the white Wargus. And so that there's this kind of confusion. And I said in the article, it's as if there's a crisis. We're living through a crisis or a crash. But unlike, for example, in 1967, just Harold Wilson went on television and said, yes, we've had to devalue the pound. We're in for some hard times. Foreign products are going to be very expensive for us, but we're in it together. We're on our own now. This is what he was saying. We in Britain, we're on our own now, and we're going to get through this. It'll be okay. And it was like this formal announcement of hard times and coming together as a people in a nation. And I find that now it's like a disaster has happened, but it hasn't been formally declared. It hasn't been announced. And so everybody kind of wanders about, like confused. And on the article I was talking about, it's this thing where you see these like women in their 20s and 30s are doing TikTok videos where they're crying because no matter how much they work, they can't make ends meet and all of this kind of thing. And I just think that's kind of the sign of the times. It's all a bit shit, but it hasn't been formally declared so that you can kind of buckle under and say, okay, the hard times are here.
Well, and I think that's sort of a confluence of two things, right? That, when I think of the conservative movement, there's a famous writer, Richard M. Weaver, who wrote this book, Ideas Have Consequences, that is this kind of like seminal piece of, American conservatism. And it's basically, and look, it was written in the 50s. It's not exactly cutting edge. The point is, like, the things that you believe and act on have consequences. So you have the conservatives saying this entire time, like, oh, you kids, don't change X, don't change Y. It will produce something bad. But never really kind of believing it could happen. And then you have, the progressives who have essentially gotten whatever they've wanted for the last 60, 70 years, really since Nuremberg. And they've got whatever they've wanted, and it's shit. They've ruined everything. And so on one hand, they sort of have this incredible denial that no, that wasn't really us. We didn't do it. We weren't in charge. it was the secret behind the scenes, like the Soviets would have called them the wreckers, or anything. This kind of like, or structural racism, this kind of like invisible third party that is making something go wrong, but also nothing's going wrong. And so you see this with the economy, that essentially, the Biden admin basically just redefined what a recession was and said, we're not in a recession. And since there's enough kind of cultural cachet to being, part of the winning party, the power of party in the US, that it worked. And so that degree to which, we are living through a crisis, but no one wants to address it, is sort of, on one hand, that's the liberal response. And on the other, I think that there's that kind of like low IQ conservative impulse to kind of beat your chest and say, we're the greatest country ever. And it's incredibly frustrating to me because look, like I like certain things about where I live, but I think you're right. We are going through a crisis and we sort of have to, it feels odd that no one is addressing it, I guess. Back to you.
It doesn't, I mean, I can't really speak for America, but I can speak for Britain that, like, it doesn't make much sense that things are so hard, but the amount of people that's coming in is like higher than it's ever been. The immigration rates are, well, like 3 times as high now as what we were during the Tony Blair era, which is regarded, again, by the centre-right, would regard it like Blair opened he did open the floodgates, but relative to today, it was maybe a third or a quarter as much as what's coming in today, like each year. It's phenomenal. And it kind of adds this sort of feeling of decay. And I remember when I was in the early 2000s, because I worked away. I worked on the continent for many years in the petrochemical sector. And I would come back. I came back for a break to England, and I saw a friend of mine, and he was saying like the River Tyne that goes through Newcastle, and he was saying, "Oh, it's so diverse. It's what was it? It's so vibrant." And I thought, and I wasn't aware. I wasn't very political, but I just thought I just got the impression that he's kind of where did that come from? Where did that kind of language come from? Where did you pick up those words that you're passing off as your own? It's vibrant and it's diverse. Like, since when did you say things like that? But then, even then, there was a kind of there was the way they pitched it was where it was going to be vibrant. It was going to be where you'd have like Mongolian street stalls and you'd have all these cheeses and all this, as Millennial Woe says, this incredible range of restaurants. And you'd have all this exotic food that you'd never tried before, and everything was going to be wonderful. It was going to be great. And then there was, you had like a decent enough run in the 2000s. But it's like now it's all it's still going on now. All of the niceties have dropped off, and it's just this raw. I love the phrase that I picked up from somebody recently. It's quantitative easing, but with people, and it's just this flooding the zone, and it has this knock-on effect of housing prices, of the jobs market, and of swamping the health services and all of this kind of thing, and it's all seedy, and it's all it's all just grotty and crappy, and everybody hates it. And I mean that it's not so much about this kind of being opposed to other people, but there's something beyond that. There's some kind of thing happens to the country what you're in. You walk down the high street and it's like Turkish barbers and vape shops where you can remember when it was a butcher's or a greengrocer's or this kind of thing. And everything's just got this shitness to it that I just find it's like this dark cloud hanging over everything. And there doesn't seem to be a way out of it because it isn't like what's going on. Like if you go back to the 1980s, with Thatcherism, there was a backlash against Thatcher. There was hardship when she shut down the heavy industries and this kind of thing. But people still felt good in their skin. They knew what was going on. They knew the effects of it. And there was I don't want to get too bogged down in the pits and all of this because it wasn't just the pits anyway. It was heavy industry as a whole, and we all got what they brought in were all these service jobs, and what Blair did. But that even then, you can see that people still felt right in their own skin. They've still kind of felt rooted to their place, and then now it's as if there's this sort of, I don't know. It's hard to explain. Atomization, I guess, is the cliche that everybody says it. But that when we use that, people usually think of like young men who don't go out and mingle and whatnot. But the population as a whole just seems to be sort of dislocated. Not. I don't know. It's a hard thing to describe. I should try a better job, really.
So this is something that I was speaking to my wife about. So I've learned that this is a pretty common thing for women of her age, that for a while, the big thing that you did, over Christmas, if you had a young daughter, was you took them to see the Nutcracker Ballet. I somehow completely missed this, knew nothing about it, but I'm married, so I ended up going with my wife. And there's a section in it where, in front of this court, they sort of have all of these envoys from other nations come forward and address the court. And so basically it's a series of kind of short ethnic dances from different areas. There's one that's supposed to be, Asian, there's one, and they're not particularly well developed. But the point is that, right, this is a previous version of culture, right? This is a ballet written well over 100 years ago. And within that, although the whole thing has, European, Russian, and kind of, more broadly French characteristics to it, just because of the art form, right? Within that is recognized there is something outside of that is distinct. These different cultures, different nations are separate, but also kind of interesting in that. And the reason I bring this up is because you can imagine the kind of people who do theater, in modern times are incredibly progressive. And not only did they really tone that down. My wife said she hadn't seen it since she was a little girl. So you can imagine the difference in time kind of pre and post Great Awakening. But in doing that, they didn't make it in any way more interesting. They didn't make the rest of it better. They just kind of reduced it to this generic gray paste feeling. And it's interesting you bring up the kind of high street where there's, what would have been greengrocers, what would have been kind of some things turned into these kind of just like empty shells for anythings. And over the last World Cup, I was in DC. I don't watch World Cup. It's not my thing. But I believe that I think Algeria beat Portugal or something like that. I can't remember. And in Georgetown, which is, is where they filmed, where they filmed The Exorcist. It's this beautiful old neighborhood in DC, very exclusive, very wealthy. The whole thing is taken over essentially by an Algerian ethnic parade, shutting the whole thing down, hooting and hollering at, 10 in the morning. And just this kind of visual imagery of a bunch of, North Africans in clapped out BMWs with flags, waving around in the kind of like ruins of this area, which was gutted by the George Floyd riots. It's like, this is it. This is perfectly emblematic of it. We have this, what would have been at one time a real neighborhood where people lived that's beautifully made, by surrounding one of the best universities in the world. And it's been reduced to boarded up shops that had their windows busted out during COVID. No one was able to afford the rent. And now we have, Algerians supporting, international sporting in front of it. It's kind of perfect. And I don't mean to say this to just, say like, oh, woe is me, the end is nigh. But there is something to that fact that, we're seeing all of these places that used to have kind of specific or interesting or like regional aspects of them reduced to just kind of gray consumerism, and much in that same way that you described that, quantitative easing of people, we're kind of like, it's an attack on the integrity of the dollar, the integrity of currency. It is sort of an attack on the integrity of culture. And I think that we're seeing kind of a compounding effect where, like you said, the internet, things like that have caused people to atomize. But there's kind of a compounding effect as well, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, in 2023, a subject that I kept coming back to, because there's this sort of, you've got the mainstream interpretation of things, you've got mainstream normal life, and then you've got a kind of stepping away or a kind of exhaustion with what that has to offer. And you'll see this in the way that people consume media. Nobody watches the mainstream anymore. Fewer people are kind of buying into those narratives. And what I was getting at in 2023 a lot with what I was calling the turning away, the great turning away, was what happens when psychologically people are just tuning out of that. Now, this is not to say that everybody goes off to the woods and builds a shack, because that's just not possible. But what it does mean is that there's this kind of tuning out, this zoning out of the mainstream. But the problem comes that now what? You know, if you're living in your new build semi-detached, which has got like an 80-year mortgage or whatever that it is they're doing in England these days, where do you go and how do you actually get away? Because it wasn't that. I know it's easy to say go off somewhere and head into the hills. I mean, that's almost impossible in England. You know, it's definitely not possible for many people to do that. But still, you find that the people are kind of in this limbo between being within the kind of cacophony of the mainstream, watching the normal television, but then also subject in their jobs. I mean, I just did an article today on the competency crisis about diversity hiring and Boeing and whatnot. People are confronted with this all of the time. And you think that like it must lead to a kind of exhaustion. And it's as if this exhaustion itself is manifesting itself across England. And you see it popping up, you see it all in different ways. Everything's like sort of banal. Everything's mundane. I realize I'm not being very upbeat here, but it's just a sort of, it's January as well. I'm allowed to be a little bit gloomy in January, but it is what I'm describing is just like this cloud of gloom that hangs over the land. And I think to sort of touch on what you were saying as well, I've been fascinated by this sort of Max Weber thing about enchanting and disenchanting the world. And our world is thoroughly disenchanted. But I've been wondering, like, if it can be, if there's levels to that where you can go into minus disenchantment, where things will eventually become so bad, so depressing, that it begins to get like sort of enchanted again, but from a darker perspective, where people are like haunted with misery and whatnot. I mean, but what I mean by disenchanted is another thing that you see in England, where I saw on Twitter a girl, I think she was an American, and she'd been to visit in England, and she posted this what appeared to be some kind of barrow. It was like a small hill, and in it was like supposed to be like Sir Lancelot's helmet or sword or something like that. So it was like this mixture of mythical and legend. And here it was, and she'd done the photograph from a certain direction. I cannot remember specifically what it was, but it was some mythological ancient English artifact was under this mound, and it had a little plaque telling you what was there. And this girl had taken a photo of it, and she was like, blah, 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 isn't that great? But then she took a photo from another angle, and there was just like this giant swathe of new build housing, like right up to the boundary with it. This drives me mad about England, because it's like it's just been completely sort of the magic's just completely dispelled at that point. It's nothing but a hill with, well, maybe nothing in there, you know. And I'm desperate, you know. The reason why I dwell gloomily on these things is because I'm desperate to find some little flame, some little spark in the grayness of it all, which is something higher and something more profound. But you kind of, it's dangerous, because you can find yourself rooting around in the trash too long, just meditating on how horrible it all is. But I'd love to be able to find a little spark like that, something to bring, just a little candle of hope that there's something more than this kind of bugman materialism, which is all anybody's got. And in the sort of the turning away kind of thing, I would like that. I would like that everybody was sort of disconnected and off looking on that journey.
Well, so it's interesting you bring up the idea of disenchantment, because I wrote an article about this a while back. And in C.S. Lewis's book, The Pilgrim's Regress, which is sort of a retelling of Bunyan's original kind of through his own life, he talks about enchantment a lot. Obviously, it is very relevant to the way that he wrote science fiction, to the way that he wrote, just kind of philosophy more generally. But he uses this example of being captured by a giant, right? In the original Pilgrim's Progress, Christian is captured by a giant and freed. I cannot remember the details to save the life of me, but in this kind of retelling of this giant has this power that kind of maintains everyone in prison cells. And it's that whenever the giant looks at you, your skin goes translucent. You can look at your arm and see your blood pumping, your muscles moving, and your bones. And everyone, our main character, the kind of stand-in for Lewis included, is completely disgusted. They can't do anything. They're kind of paralyzed by malaise. And the name of this giant is the spirit of the age. And he's using that as a way to talk about, because again, a man from a different era, kind of the rise of Freudianism, the idea that, you are just a purely, you're this squalid material creature. And don't get me wrong, there's a certain perspective from which that's true. You are material, right? The giant is showing you something about yourself that is true. But it's not a truth you can sustain yourself on. It's kind of this like minute technicality, but it does, disenchant the world. And so Lewis is saved by reason, right? That's the thing that kind of leads him through. But I'm fascinated by that visual image, that kind of that disenchantment to such a degree that it does sort of lead to kind of crippling lethargy. And one of the things that I think in my darker moments in Morgoth is that people like you and I are kind of too far gone. This sort of like tyranny of self-awareness, the moment you start thinking about these things, you can never really recapture them as, legitimate and sincere. That when you think about enchantment, it's not the same thing as being enchanted, I guess.
Yes, and it's I think Heidegger sort of wrote about it, where it's as if it's like a wisp of light, where when your eyes fix on it, it will disappear, but immediately. So you're forever kind of. It's the same with me in religion. A lot of people will have said to me, like, why didn't you just come out and declare yourself like a Catholic or something? Because you're that far. And I'm like, well, firstly, I want to be honest. And that's not where I am. My problem is that I am in this kind of disenchanted world, and I want to try and crawl my way out of it. And that can lead to some good insights, but not much in the way of catharsis. And I get this a lot. I mean, there's different sort of people who will criticize, like, you are like the most gloomiest bastard on the internet. And it's like, well, yeah, but my kind of cope, if you want to call it that, but it's actually true. I did an article called Ruminations on a Vegetable Patch, and it is actually, I'm actually quite happy and quite content in my normal life. But I've always been a person who takes pleasure in kind of small things, rather than the larger things in the world. I'll comment on all of that, but in me, I'm happy to sort of plant carrots, or I mean, I had a fish tank once. I go for long walks with my dog. I don't need much to keep myself sustained in that way. But obviously not everyone's the same, and that doesn't. I'm not sure if that scales up either, if you're looking for answers to civilizational problems, which again, it sort of feeds back into what I was saying about the turning away. Like, because I'm kind of like that. Is everywhere, or is everybody else like that, or are they tuned in on that? I mean, on the subject of disenchantment, I remember I did an article the year before last where it was in the summer, and it was a summer heat wave, and there was these reports coming out of the rivers in Europe were at their lowest they had ever been for hundreds of years. And what had happened is that hundreds of years ago, in rivers like the Rhine, people had gone down and put their names. When there'd been almost like a drought in Germany or whatever, people had gone down and then scratched on rocks or put pillars down there to mark the year. And there was one of them, and it said it was a stone which hadn't been seen for like 150 years because the water hadn't fallen that far. And it was something like, I'm Franz Schmidt. When you see me, cry. And the idea was like one day the water would retreat to such a degree that would show up, and it would sort of mean famine. But what I noticed about the pictures that were going around about the Rhine was that you actually saw there was like shopping trolleys and car tires and stolen bicycles which had been dumped. And it just broke my heart, because I thought, this is like the Rhine of Rhine maidens, This is the Rhine that sort of drove Wagner to create his great operas, or all of those romantic pictures. This is the Rhine of legend, which was Germany's traditional kind of boundary, and all of this. And I thought, and there it is. Like, there's no gold there. There's no Rhine maidens there. There's just shopping trolleys. And what made it worse was the German newspapers and the European Union were in a panic because they use the Rhine. Like, they were saying the water's getting so low that we won't be able to transport cement to the industrial cause of Europe. And I just thought, this is the Rhine. Like, this is the River Rhine. It's a mythological thing. And here we are, like, oh no, we don't know if we're going to be able to transport the cement over the top of the car tires and the stolen shopping trolleys. And this is the problem. This is this fallenness of the world, which adds to the gloom and despair on a metaphysical level. I understand, like, if you were to all these kind of vouch types, these sort of libtard influencers on the internet, they wouldn't understand anything that I've just said there. They wouldn't take any of that seriously for a second. They would think that my head's in the clouds. They don't even have that frame of reference whatsoever. They would be worrying that they couldn't carry the cement over the shopping trolleys and whatnot. And it's like, even to think in those terms seems a little bit woo-woo and a little bit mystical. And it's a deep, deep dark hole that we're in, I think.
One of the things that I think about a lot, is that idea that I don't really ever think you can go back. And the things that we have memories of, if not living memories, but kind of like written accounts of, a lot of our cultural touchstones, are kind of the fruits of a civilizational summer, the high flowering of a culture. And, you brought up that idea that maybe reenchantment comes back, but it comes back in a dark way. And that's something I think about, because when you read early medieval things, things like the beginning kind of like crystallization of British culture, things like, Beowulf, or things that the monks were writing about. It's a very dark world. There actually are monsters out there that will rip you apart. And eventually that kind of transforms into something nicer, something more, I guess, visually appealing. But it does sort of seem to me that, you don't go straight to that. You have to go back through a period where things are kind of nasty and unpleasant. And maybe the first bit of reenchantment you get is that, there's a demon, there's a skinwalker, there's something out there. And I don't know, I don't want to get too esoteric in it, but I do think that there's a sense in which it's like, like de Maester would have said, it's like, to get that corruption out of you, you kind of need to pay a blood price. And maybe that involves kind of sliding back down into superstition, as the kind of materialist would say. But it's interesting you bring up the Rhine as well. Like, well, what is the problem? Is it the fact that this great river, the symbol of the Rhine has been turned into a highway on the water, for the construction of, or to aid in construction? Or is it that it's not a particularly good highway anymore? And I think that that's one of the things that you see in all of this, right? Is that the goals of the people in charge are kind of so petty, just kind of like maintenance almost, that we've lost track of that kind of things that need to be enchanted for a civilization to kind of pass on. So one of the issues that kind of motivated me to get more involved in, I don't know, we want to say the internet commentary sphere or whatever, was the destruction of kind of statues in the US. That issue's been talked to death. I don't mean to get into it. But kind of running through that, you see these kind of center-right types who will say a lot of things like, oh, why do you care so much? It's just a statue. The man is still there. The idea is still there. They can't take it away from you. And like, okay, that's technically true, but there's something lost in when something's profaned like that. It doesn't ever really become the same thing. And I think that the problem is that, like, at least in our modern world, I don't know if things can ever really be reconsecrated. They can just be desecrated and kind of brought down. And I mean, look, like, I've not seen the Napoleon movie. I have no interest in it, but I think that that's kind of a crystallized version of that. Where we're taking a man who became something bigger than a man and making him banal, making him venial, making him gross. And there's almost an element where it's like, I don't know if I'll be able to go back from that. Like, once that's in your head, it's kind of stuck there, I guess. So sorry, Morgoth, I've been talking for a while.
No, yeah, no, yeah, I totally understand. I won't be watching the Napoleon film. I was just one of the things that the centre right does in Britain is, you've probably seen the memes where it's like, because we're running out of space, basically. We ran out of space a long time ago. They started building on the floodplains. So now we just get floods a lot. And then they'll blame that on climate change. But one of the things that just drives me to despair is that you would at least think, under the influence of someone like Roger Scruton, who did understand the kind of things that we're talking about, where something is greater than the sum of its parts. But you will see the Daniel Hannan types, you will see the kind of neoliberal right just reduce everything down to it'll be about how many houses they can place on the fields and how much GDP that would sort of bring up, and what that would be the economic, and it just makes me sick that they've even got the gall to place like right wing or conservative anywhere near them, when what they stand for is completely antithetical to any kind of what I would regard as right-wing value system. And one of the problems is that they have a point, because you can't quantify the fields in that way. I actually got into an argument and a debate with a woman who was a Tory councillor in the real world over a land dispute, which they were going to turn into it was like a sort of car park come retail thing. And there was a little protest going on some years ago. And the people were trying to find ways that the people basically just liked having this green space. And it was a farmer's field with like a little path that you could sort of unofficially, he'd let you get away with it. You could walk your dog around it. The farmer didn't actually mind people doing that because he knew that their dog scared off the rabbits. That was his little thing. But I remember this woman, and I was like, everybody was giving these arguments about how, well, it wouldn't work for the traffic or this kind of thing. And I said, can it not just be saved because it's beautiful and it's pleasant? It's just a quiet, green, open stretch. There was a little woodland near the bottom and everything. And I said, like, because is that not an argument? Like, just saving it because it's pleasant, because it's beautiful? And she said, no. Even to argue against it, you would have to have some kind of utilitarian argument. It would have to be based in materialism. It would have to be that, for example, it wasn't efficient to have it there because of the way that it linked up with the road networks or something. Everything will have to boil down to this sort of raw grid-like thinking, which I just find horrific. And to get back to the sort of the beginning of the conversation, in a lot of the ways, when we talk about the people who, and I was referring to them, sort of being lost, and without a kind of pole, without something solid under their feet the way they did in the 1980s. And part of that, I think, is because they are in, leaving aside all of the work stuff and all of that, I think even then what undergirds that even further is a kind of utilitarian world of numbers and spreadsheets. There's the woke is a deviation and a bastardization of that. It's as if it's been hijacked. But then even under that, so that's kind of like the foundation of so much. And when you get people wandering around this kind of lost feeling, it's because it's unnatural to live that way, which is what C.S. Lewis would have understood. It's not normal to live in a way where everything, especially when the material comfort is starting to dry up, because what are you actually left with? The deal was that, well, you go along with this and you'll be comfortable. What happens when you've gone along with it and you're not even comfortable? And I think this is where you begin to see the darkness creeping in, where you get into a kind of post-utilitarian mindset, which is very gloomy and very dark. And I don't want to shy away from where that's going to take people.
So it's interesting because this is connected to an idea that has become fashionable for certain, like, let's just say like 105 IQ young people, which is this idea of effective altruism. So the example would be like, I found out that my best friend's mother died, but to go to the funeral, I'd have to miss work and miss out on some pay. And the collective amount of goodness in the world would actually be higher if I skipped the funeral and went into work and then provided goods and services for other people and used that money to, help other people as well. And what's interesting about it is that despite having that phrase, effective altruism, it sort of permits the most just like debased behavior, the most kind of like needlessly selfish, the needlessly destructive behavior under the guise of morality. And I think the thing that's so galling about much of this is that it's not what we were kind of raised to believe, in kind of movies and media, which is that it's mustache twirling villains at the top. It's Klaus Schwab, it's, secret Hitler or anything. It's the same amount of evil, the same amount of, social reconstruction, or like, not reconstructioning, the same amount of social engineering, right? But towards the most banal, pointless ends, to kind of make a number go up marginally. And if you've ever had any kind of training in like the techniques of managerialism, like I did when I went through school, you realize that the most galling thing about these numbers is that they're all essentially fake. They're all so built on assumption. They're so built on variables, right? That they're designed to be completely and totally opaque and pointless. So they can just be changed anyway. So it's this kind of like awful situation where, you must make a rational fact-based argument to people who don't care about rational fact-based arguments and are willing to cheat the game anyway. And so I think that that's another kind of point of the malaise as well, where it's just like there seems to be no, like all of these changes are presented as inevitable. And there is the way in which you are allowed, quote unquote, to make your objections known precludes you making those objections in the first place, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking that I watched the debate with it's kind of touches on this, but I watched about an hour of the debate between Alex Jones on Destiny on like the Donald Trump January the 6th, and did he what was he trying to do, a coup? And it's like, on the one hand you had this pretend hyper rationalist in Destiny like citing the laws and citing all of these things and citing, well, you know, this is what such and such quote had said at this court hearing, and Alex Jones was just like sort of banging the table and shouting like over the top of him, saying like, "You're gonna get wrecked on X for this." Like, I got you, and it was just all this bombastic kind of rubbish. I mean, but then at the same time, I thought, but the fact is, like, the sources that Destiny's using are all bullshit as well. so it's like even the pretense of there's this kind of performance of like, I'm just giving you the facts, but that was lies as well, and that was just as fake and absurd as Alex Jones kind of bashing on the table and jumping around like a gorilla. Like, none of it. And I just switched it off. I thought, none of this is true. None of this has none of this comes remotely to neither side. It's all nonsense. It's all just hot air and a waste of time.
Well, definitely. And I realize this is a highly controversial topic, so I'll have to speak delicately on it. But when you think of that phrase, you know, facts don't care about your feelings, right? To me, I associate that with Ben Shapiro. And to put it mildly, he himself has disproven that phrase, you know, in the last several months. You know, he's acted like a petulant child. And it's very clear that whole thing was an act. You know, that whole thing was just a way to rationalize something he wanted done anyway. And the moment, you know, that he sees it to be advantageous to flip the script and become this sort of like mustache twirling supervillain, you know, kill them all, right? We'll flip the script. And so like, it's part of the reason that I never engage in debate, because it's so clearly, and maybe this was always the case, but at least in our current cultural moment, it's so clearly just grandstanding. And one of the things about that is that, you know, when we think of things that kind of broke dialogue, you know, at least in our spheres, like to me, the rise of the kind of like drama debate stream, like that just made it impossible to have real discussions like between party A and party B anymore. It became a kind of consumer entertainment product. And so to me, it does, I guess, kind of beg the question of like, oh, is this just inherent to dialect, or is it, you know, kind of a product of the internet? I guess I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, I've never been in like a formal debate. I've been on plenty live streams where things got a bit heated and you have a bit of a back and forth on that about something, but I've never volunteered myself to actually go on, and nobody's asked me to debate them either. I know that I wouldn't have the patience for it. I know that I would lose my temper. I know that I wouldn't. I just couldn't do it.
Well, this is an aside, and this is the worst thing you can do to someone like this. But there's someone who, for a while until I blocked him on Twitter, was just ringing my ear off until I finally muted him. And all he wanted to do is he wanted me to debate you. And I could never figure out, I was like, on what? Like, have we ever, one, interacted, or two, argued about it? I don't know. I think that there's some expectation that as someone with an audience, you know, you must kind of do these sort of debates. But anyway, carry on.
No, I don't even know what we debate. I don't even know what we disagree on.
Right, exactly. Like it's dumb. It's basically just like, these are two people on the internet I like. It's like the you know, like Alien v Predator or something, just like mash them up, let's go. It's like that's not what a debate is, you know. This isn't just something you do for entertainment. Anyway, carry on.
Yeah, it's just pure entertainment. Like let's just make up something to argue about for the pleasure of the audience. And no, I haven't got I haven't got any time for that whatsoever, actually.
Well, and I think that's been, I was talking with you know, a Thomas about this, and he was specifically kind of skewering Churchill on this point. You know, that the idea that, you know, being a great kind of like rabble-rousing speaker, you know, this great rhetorician, is an admirable trait, is a relatively recent thing. You know, that when you look at kind of traditionally lauded pieces of speech writing, right, in American history, it's something like the Gettysburg Address. And why is that notable? Well, it's notable because it's quite short, actually. You know, and people viewed Lincoln as this kind of taciturn figure. And he talks about Churchill kind of being this shyster, this showman, and a lot of his contemporaries recognized it. They called him, the flim flam man. But not only is that kind of that tactic of just kind of like pure rhetoric, pure just kind of like casting yourself as, this kind of like force, but kind of perversely, like those same traits, because, we're far enough down the line, have been associated with conservatism and the right. One of the things that you talk about a lot, and I get some of it because, kind of growing up in the American conservative movement, is your concept of, bulldog nationalism, which is the nationalism of, Winston Churchill, the post-Nuremberg world. And we've talked quite a lot. We've been really done, I think, a decent job, skewering the materialist part of the right. But what's galling is that, even when the right does, and I'm using the most mainstream version of that term, right, tries to make a moral claim, tries to kind of LARP, wear the clothes of great men, they're doing it with these kind of like horrible, narrowly like viewed figures. Like Reagan is that for the right in America, which again, like there's enough people have deconstructed Reagan, but it is just kind of like, even when we attempt to make what would be called like a value claim or something, we're using it, using the language of, MLK and all these figures who I just hate.
I mean, I love John Wayne movies, and I had a heavy Christmas, and there was one night when I just kind of put the John Wayne box set on and watched a few John Wayne movies, and one of them was called Big Jake, where the setup was that his grandson, this was like fat John Wayne in the 60s, sort of True Grit style John Wayne. And his grandson had been kidnapped, and he was off on the trail to get him back. And he had this Indian with him, and the Indian said, "I'm not going to go along with you if they're Apache. I won't kill my own people." And John Wayne was like, "Well, look, I'm going to get my grandson back. I don't know, and I don't care what their race is." And I thought,
"Hey, Morgoth, how you doing?"
Oh, it got me in full flow there. The internet went out. I've got a box thing that's it plugs into the wall, and it was in the other room, and it got me in full flow as well.
Oh, don't worry. My listeners of my show will be quite used to it. For a while, I was living with a guy, and we had this stupid cat, and it would shove over the router and completely knock the internet out. So there's probably half a dozen shows where the same thing happens. The audio just clips, and it's because my roommate's stupid fucking cat just decided to take out the router. But anyway, you were just saying about this John Wayne movie where the Indian wouldn't attack Apaches. I think it was.
So just, I don't know if the audience, my internet basically fell off, so I'm going to try and pick up in full flow where I got chopped off. And you'll see people like Piers Morgan will make a virtue out of it, that they will, and just basically the right. And I don't mean to sort of get bogged down to this purely kind of racial thinking, but it's just like, well, I don't care because what they're saying, if they do it in this kind of over the top macho way, as if say, I don't care what your identity is, buddy. I don't care where you're from. What should I care? And I think, well, you should probably care quite a bit, to be honest. You should, because what they're doing is making a virtue out of like not seeing difference, not even entertaining for a second that maybe this outgroup have their own interests, and their own interests are against yours. Maybe they have an own in-group and you're the outgroup. And it's just this sort of pathetic overcompensation, this sort of Piers Morgan, John Wayne. And I love John Wayne. I hate Piers Morgan. But just this, I don't care where you're from. Doesn't bother me. Don't try and hit me with your identity politics. And it's just one of the many things that just sort of it just gets right on my nerves because it's so transparently stupid and fake.
Well, you see the same thing with masculinity and kind of masculinity influencers, that look like I exercise. It's good for you to do so, but the idea that, in order to be a man, you have to be this kind of, heavily tattooed, bearded guy, who uses man products like beard oil and, things like that. And that's the essence of it. And it's sort of this like overcompensation. And I think some of it is maybe slightly natural in the sense that, we are kind of disconnected from, much in the same way we're disconnected from enchantment, right? We are kind of disconnected from, masculinity. And so I guess I can't blame people for trying to build something in that. But it's this idea, right, that, you need to have this kind of like swaggering tough guy persona, but adopt this kind of like incoherent collection of ideas. And that is synonymous with being this kind of like machismo filled tough guy.
Yeah, and usually it's just copying something off like an 80s action movie. I've never understood that. I've never understood the whole like there's discourse around masculinity on the internet. I've never ever done a single piece of content on it. I don't even put a tweet out on it. I just view it all as well. The first thing is I'm old. I'm well into my 40s, and I don't take kindly to being lectured to, because I've had a long life and I've been through quite a bit. And so I don't want to be lectured to by somebody on the internet. I don't want to be told what I have to eat. I don't want to be told how many, like, what they can bench press. I don't care. I don't know what it is with my background. I just find it all a bit gay. I just hate it. I hate it all. And I also don't really get into this sort of relationship discourse as well. I think all of these things are just too much online, too much internet, to be honest. And I know that's a kind of old-fashioned boomer take, but it is. But at the same time, I'm not going to be like a ball ache about it and then go on some crusade and start like quote tweeting people who talk about how many eggs you should eat a day, or how many carbs you need in your diet, or what shaving foam doesn't have seed oils in, all of this kind of stuff. Yeah, I just think, yeah, whatever. Like I don't care. It's not my thing. But neither am I going to be like an arsehole about it and start flame wars. You know what I mean?
Well, that is a virtue few have. I'll put it that way. I think that you've talked a lot about kind of the structural problems of the internet. In your essay, Walking Away, you describe this dynamic where it became a lot of kind of normal socializing went away when people could find a group that was quote unquote more interesting than the people around them on the internet. And I do think that there's something as well about that. And I realize the irony in saying this as someone who has a podcast where all I do is talk all the time. So, fair enough. But, the idea that your opinion on any number of things is a vital part of discourse, down to the level of like all these kind of like granular ways in which people live their lives. And, from one perspective, I'm in my personal life quite conservative, and you could even say, my politics are quite far right, but I just don't have the instinct for like busybody moralism. And I think that I don't know, that sometimes gets substituted as like, oh, if you're particularly traditional or conservative, that must mean that you're essentially like Phyllis Schlafly on steroids. I don't know. And I don't think those are quite the same thing. Like there's a difference between kind of like traditionalism and being a hall monitor, I guess.
Yeah, I think like because I'm like a Gen X sort of 90s type, there is a kind of there is an aloofness where I don't really care very much, and a lot of it I find is kind of pompous and pretentious. But again, like it's sort of like, well, it's to the degree where I can't even be bothered to kind of make a big deal out of it because I just don't care that much. There's things that There's a lot that irritates me on the internet, and I actually spend less and less time on the internet. I think part of that's because YouTube has gone kind of weird. Like it's as if like the dissident right, as they call it, hardly even exists at all on YouTube anymore. Like I know, like there's say I don't know 6 or 7 YouTube channels out there in our circles or whatnot, but I frequently I remember a few years ago I would go on YouTube and I was just overwhelmed with stuff. Oh God, where do I even start? Now, almost everything I'm being recommended is just there's a few channels. You got there's the Oron or EA and Prudentialist and stuff. But really, I'm just being bombarded with like, what is it? What is it like? These kind of ambient sort of mix things where it's like you're standing alone in a nuclear bunker during like that nuclear winter, and you're the last person on the world or something. Music that will make you sleep, like you're in a woodland forest in the middle of the night. That's all I really get on YouTube anymore. And it's kind of in a way liberating because I think, well, all right, whatever. I'll go off and read that new David Gamble fantasy book, that Legend or whatever. I find that I've got much more time to read, but I think there's actually too many streams in our circles. So I'm kind of like, what I'm getting at is I'm becoming increasingly distant from the scene, and I'm not sure how much of that is me or how much is sort of just algorithms and the way things are moving on the internet. I certainly spend a lot of time reading Substack stuff these days. I will say that.
So this is something I've been talking about because, I'm friends with the guys at the Beowulf Foundation who are kind of a behind the scenes group. They do a lot of coordination. They're expanding, but they do a lot of statistical work for our guys as well. And they have a big kind of paper, I guess is not the right word, but a big information dump they're about to release about this. And one of the things they talk about is that effectively YouTube has put a hard cap on how many right-wing viewers there are. There's no recommendation whatsoever. And so it's sort of a zero-sum game. If you're winning, someone else is proportionally losing. But what I've found, because I've had a similar discovery in the last couple of weeks, which is that Substack is sort of the land of milk and honey. There's not only is the quality of a writer there incredibly high, but also you can actually grow and interact with people, in a way that is very, very difficult to do on the kind of regime patrolled parts of the internet. And so I've started putting a lot more effort in over there. And look, like this is primarily an audio podcast that has a YouTube channel attached to it, so it's a little bit different there. But I know what you mean, because it sort of freezes everything. I do think that the censorship regime has probably been good for the right from a certain perspective. Like I won't name names, but if you look at kind of holdovers from a previous era, a lot of those guys are not particularly impressive from a certain perspective. And I'm speaking vaguely for a reason. I don't want to kick up drama. But I think that the intense pressure it's been an evolutionary advantage, I think, from a certain perspective.
Yeah. I mean, I was lucky because I was not immediately in the sort of the crosshairs of the censorship regime, but I wasn't far away either. But my YouTube channel was small enough and young enough at the time that I could kind of change direction. And I caught that. There's a lot of the earlier videos which were really like me screaming into the microphone, outrage about some things that had happened. The hate reading the Guardian ones, a couple of those, they're gone now. And I kind of cottoned on. I mean, Distributist, I mentioned this a lot, but he was kind of influential because I thought, yeah, I like the direction and Jonathan Bowden said it as well, where you've got to pitch in a way like throwing a javelin over the heads of the censors. You've got to kind of get it over their heads because they're kind of sifting. What do you call it when it's like a dredger? You know, like them ships that go out and dredge and in the oceans, and they scrape along the bottom. And there's certain things they're going to hit, and you have to make sure that you're not on the bottom and getting dredged up when the censorship trawler comes. And my channel, I kind of redirected it where I started doing much more abstract things, especially the Oswald Spengler videos, because I was just really fascinated by him at that time. Well, I still am, but there was those videos, the kind of videos that I did, and then like formal sort of essays about much more in-depth civilizational things that I was interested as well. And I realized that I'm not getting hit here because I'm not being picked up. I'm not targeting specific groups. I'm not trying to be edgy. And yeah, so it was kind of weird. I was able to go through what was a bit of a winter at the end of the day, like it's where everybody else, so many other people got shot down. They got taken out in the storm. And then I went out to Substack because blogging was where I began. Plus, Substack's great. I mean, I actually think maybe the reason like YouTube's dying for the sort of algorithms that target us is Substack. Maybe there's some kind of correlation there where there's just not that many people using it, or I don't know. I mean, I will say that I've had Substack articles that have got as many, which would be a nice like view count for a YouTube video, like say 10, 12,000 views on a written blog, because you know if it was once seen that blogging was a dead form, that was it. Video was that song. Video killed the music star, but radio, what was it? Video killed the radio star.
Yeah, by the Boggles, I think. I can't remember.
Yeah, and it was kind of like YouTube killed the blogging star, and then it was like, well, turns out like blogging's going to kill the YouTube star. Maybe. I mean, this year will be the test. There's already organized sort of hits on Substack taking place. But I think it'll be okay. I think there's something about it. It feels more sophisticated. If BitChute and Odyssey are still up there, I don't think Substack's gonna get hit too hard. So yeah, that's kind of, I'm optimistic. I really like it. I really like the format. But the YouTube, it's, I don't know what, it's just nothing. All there is that weird ambient music. Maybe it's because I've got like a big channel that I'm getting hit especially hard with what they're suggesting to me. I mean, I even made a joke that I put on Twitter where like the video that I was being recommended was quite literally you're standing alone on a moon on the outskirts of the solar system, and all you want is peace and quiet. And I thought, I remember the days like 5 years ago, you'd get like Jordan Peterson shoved in your face. Now I'm getting this. Does that mean the Jordan Peterson stuff? Like, does that not work anymore? Now I've got a picture 12 rules to clean your bedroom turned into you're standing on the moon of Europa and you can't hear a thing for 1 billion miles. Is that what YouTube's de-radicalization algorithms are now? I don't know.
Well, and I have an interesting perspective on this because my personal YouTube channel and the one I use for this are completely different. So I see two different sides of it. And the one where I post things is very much like you said. There's more of the kind of like Peterson adjacent RNC stuff on my personal one. But it's interesting you bring up the analogy of Bowden kind of throwing the javelin over the wall, because I've had multiple conversations with people who, like my work in real life. And it's amazing how many of them do not pick up on what I am saying. I mean, to the point where they'll ask me questions like, oh, are you worried that some of the people that you talk to might be racist? Were you worried that, what do you do if you encounter someone who talks about known conspiracy theories? And I don't know how to say them. I'm like, well, it's me. Have you not picked up on this?
Yeah. It's yeah.
And so I think that it's maybe when you're in the know and you kind of understand what is being implied, that's very insular knowledge. And from the outside looking in, that passes through a lot of people's defenses in a way that I think we don't realize. So that's maybe just a point for that. But Morgoth, I looked at the time and I realized we've gone about 20 minutes over, and I don't want to take any more of your evening. But if people want to find more of you, more of your work, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, everything that I do, I've got a YouTube channel here, Morgoth's Review, which you can find easily on YouTube. Well, hopefully easy. I don't know now. I think you will. And then I've got the Substack. Now, everything that I do goes on Substack. So if eventually this will go up there, when you put it out there, and if I do a video, it goes up on there. If I'm getting an interview somewhere, it goes up on there. But then all of my written essays are up there, including the new one as of today, about Boeing and the incompetency crisis.
Yeah, I read that article, took notes on it, and then absolutely failed to ask you a single question on that. Did not use my notes at all. So I
had a whole line of spiel lined up about. We're talking about you. We're talking about YouTube. And I had. Are you aware of Philip Glass, the musician?
I don't believe so. No.
It's this kind of. He's minimalist.
Is he the classical? The kind of like modern classical composer, right?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I know.
Very minimalist. And I've listened to him for years, actually, and I'm well aware, of course, of his background and whatnot. And I've over this last.
Is he Italian or?
Well, over the last. I don't know what it is. I do like his music, but I've become fascinated, absolutely obsessed with the Akhenaten opera that he did, but it's probably too late. It seems a shame. I had a whole load of spiel about that.
Well, I'll put it this way: if you have time, I'm willing to go into it. I just don't want to take up.
Well, do you know the story of Akhenaten, the Egyptian pharaoh?
Is this the pharaoh that tried to convert Egypt to monotheism?
Yes. Well, yeah. That's kind of the he
go over it, because the audience might not have heard of it.
Basically, you had. I mean, I'm not an expert on it, but you had Amenhotep the third, I think he was, and then you had the standard religion of Egypt. And when he became pharaoh, he threw it all out, and he worshipped the sun, which is what he called the Aten. And this was revolutionary. This was. I mean, you can imagine how insane this was. And it caused a huge disruption. And he moved out. He had to move south. It's terrible because there's going to be people in the comments in the chat who know much more about this than I do. Because I'm just picking up on it the last few days. I've just been listening to the opera all the time. And he began to worship the sun, and he invented his own religion, and he actually built a city about 100 miles south of Thebes. Would it be? And Glass's opera picks up on all of this, but it puts it in such a powerful, kind of esoteric sort of way where it's as if they love him. And what I thought was interesting when you touched on the monotheism, it is like that. He'd brushed away the polytheism, and then he'd sort of erected monotheism via sun worship. And apparently one of his priests is rumored to have been Moses. And you get in all this weird esoteric thing. And when I was looking at the Wikipedia page on the opera, I noticed, because Glass himself has got a Jewish background, but then so many of the others, the producers, the writers, all of them were. And I thought it was interesting because it's as if they had this connection to them. There's this kind of, they got something in that, like it was a precursor to what was to come a little bit later. And when you listen to Glass's opera, it is like that. It is like there's this real kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Like there's the full orchestra. It's as if it is this sort of spiritual birth that's happened. Like it's the most spectacular, wonderful thing ever. Whereas, you know, as an amateur, just kind of looking into this, I watched a few documentaries on YouTube, and they were all saying he was just this madman. He was just this Machiavellian con man. He didn't believe in any of it, and you know, you had these like British historians going out. This was another thing as well. Was like there was like these documentaries, you know, from the BBC and whatnot. Now they were on YouTube, and they were just going down. As Spengler would say, all they were doing was looking at dead things and trying to piece together the past through these dead things, and not actually looking or reading and trying to get to the feeling of it. Whereas Glass's sort of opera really does bring you into the feeling of it all. And I think, again, it touches on what we've been talking about here, because you have a sense that here, I mean, that world already would have been enchanted, but here it was kind of raised to another level of it. And in Glass's opera, he's specifically going for that. And you have like a narrator who's got a very clipped English accent, and he sounds very upper class, and he is narrating the story, and he's doing it in this sort of, you know, and the sun was born on the heavens, and then they looked up into the sky, and the stars rained, and it's all of this, whoa, it's all of this, this is magnificent. This is the, you know, this is the birth of the world kind of thing here, and it's purely spiritual, and it's purely obviously related to that particular group seem to find a lot in it. And then at the end, then it's so dramatic, you know. You've got the killing, you've got the exile, and then all this communion with the sun, and then at the end, the narrator comes back, and he gives this he gives this sort of thing where he's saying, if you were to visit the site today, you will need to take the bus, and it could be a 2.5-hour bus journey. You can pay tickets, and the tickets will cost $4.80 to see the ruins of the monument. So all of a sudden, it's completely disenchanted. It's completely gone. All of the magic and all of the spiritualism that you've just sort of had burst across you, the narrator himself has just been reduced to this tour guide. Yes, and you can see the ruins today, and you can. It's a 3.5-hour journey where you can fly into Cairo, and then you can pay a taxi to take you. And you think, yeah, this is what it's all about, isn't it? And what I think, what I want, like, you know, without sounding like a madman, is this Akhenaten type of figure. You know, it is this kind of just burst of brilliance and madness to re-enchant the world.
Well, and it's interesting that at the end, you know, they undercut it, because I think of this a lot, and you see this moment repeated in lower forms of media, right? Where someone will kind of strike a heroic pose, you know, go through kind of 9/10 of a traditionally heroic scene, and then they'll kind of undercut it with a joke at the end, like, oh, that was awkward, or like, oh, can you believe we just did that? You know, people refer to this a lot as millennial writing. But that idea that the symbolic, the transcendent, the heroic is essentially the punchline to a joke, that it's sort of embarrassing or immature to have that without it being subverted or undercut.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's an idea that drives me crazy. It's why I genuinely can't watch most like modern action movies, or even like any sort of movie like that at all, because of that need to consistently undercut.
Yes, yeah, and it's this like 2 hours. I mean, don't get me wrong, it is Philip Glass, and some of it is repetitive to the point of like madness. But then, yeah, you're right. At the end, it seems to be undercut, and you're thinking, is it we're back to just these barren ruins where this pure orgy of worship and transcendence, which has just preceded it, which obviously has some kind of deep significance to Glass and his group. And now we're back to sitting in a taxi with some fat Egyptian. What's that about? What are you doing? And it's terrible because if I listen through it, I've been listening to it a lot. You when that bit comes on, you think that's it, it's over, the magic's gone. We're back now. We're back now, standing with all of the tourists. It's almost like a meta commentary on like where Egypt's place is in modernity, where that all of that happened. It was all fantastic. It was all earth-shattering, and now you're standing in a queue, waiting to take your photo with the Japanese tourists and your little trinkets of the pyramids, and
Well, and that's, I think, that is the gaze of the spirit of the age, as Lewis would describe it, right? You're cutting through anything to just the pure like blood and guts materialism of it. Like, oh well, as great as that opera might have been, is this like incredible kind of like Carlyle style great man madman. Well, now it's just the third tourist attraction on the right, and like of course that's technically true. Like that is a literal factual truth. But like, what have we lost in that? What have we sacrificed in the death of that myth?
Especially when you've it's the same person who's done that. He's gone to all that effort to depict the sort of the madness and the magic and the horror of this story, which is there, and then just to do that at the end,
Well, and I feel like it is sort of this like profound crisis of imagination, where it's sort of like all of this wonderful thing must be bound up in kind of me and my mundane life. Like the entire goal of transcendence, which is to kind of act as a channel to almost be possessed by an idea or something greater than yourself, has been completely overridden by this, like, well, it has to be relatable to me. It has to kind of refer back to kind of my mundane daily life. And it is kind of the reverse of that you see in these kind of modern biographies, the way we write about, the great men of history, right? Which is both, there's this like, that kind of greatness of them is viewed as being smoke and mirrors. It's viewed as being not realistic, not adult. And so like, again, like I like a lot of Gen X touchstones, right? But that sort of cynicism you see, that anyone kind of, if they're acting heroic, if they're acting in such a way, they must have this kind of like dirty secret behind it. It just seems this kind of like poison, that once it's in your brain, you can't really ever get rid of it. I don't know. And this kind of, this refers back to what we were talking to earlier, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, just to finish it off, there's a trilogy, a Glass trilogy, where Einstein on the beach, and that's about science. There's Satyagara, which is about Mahatma, I can't say any of these Indians, Mahatma Gandhi. And then you've got the Akhenaten one. Mahatma Gandhi is the one about politics, and then you've got Akhenaten, which is religion. Perhaps he's more at home. I don't know. I wouldn't say he's not at home for the first like hour and 50 minutes of the Akhenaten opera, but yeah. I mean, I think I think what draws me to that, leaving aside the kind of the end, is that it is an oddity in our day and age. I mean, where he's obviously gone into that, creating it, being aware or kind of being in a way aware of the disenchanted world. And here we are listening to that in a disenchanted world. So it's almost like it's this kind of window looking back outwards at something. It's, you know, like a mirrors reflecting off each other forever. It's a typical kind of postmodern thing. But yeah, I just find it fascinating, and I think I'm rambling about it because there's something to it which I want to explore, but I don't know what it is yet. You know, maybe in a few months you'll see a video pop up on the channel or something.
I will say just the last note on kind of the nuts and bolts of, you know, writing and producing videos. And I'll just say I consider myself still kind of an apprentice in that art, right? Is that there's something nice about being able to kind of jump back and forth between the two art forms, the two like ways of communicating, because a conversation like this is very free flowing, and you can sort of pick at veins of ore, you know, like, oh, there's something there, and kind of figure out like, oh, is there enough here to worth, you know, taking it back to the concrete world where you sort of have to sit down and wrestle with it and make it into something. And I feel like having these sort of conversations lets you skip over, you know, the process of writing a draft that gets to that 20 or 30% mark. And then you realize, oh, this isn't worth going on with. You know, if nothing else, it's helpful for that.
Yeah, that's true. It's true. I mean, you know, there's a lot of good things get tossed away on live streams as well. I think things which would be much better truncated down for just a standalone sort of piece of content. But I mean, it's bad because I'm kind of having a go at live streaming again, and I'm like literally live streaming with you right now. But it's a bit of a shame because, you know, as I said, like video killed the radio star, but live streaming killed the video essay star as well. So I've got a bit of a bee in me bonnet about that as well.
All right, Morgoth, I will have the links to the things you've mentioned in the description, so you should all check that out. As far as my stuff, you can find the show on Apple, Spotify, at least for now, on YouTube. You should also check out my Substack. I've been putting in a lot more work there. It's worth your time to check it out, or at least I think so. If you want to support us more directly, I am sponsored by Axios Remote Fitness and Coaching. New workout programs have gone out today, and they are very good. JD knows his stuff. My private group chat decided to post IQ stats today, and I'll put it this way: some of you better get strong because you're certainly not smart. So anyway, check that out. And again, Morgoth, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
No problem. All the best.
And everyone at home, keep your head up. The light can't last forever. Good night.